If you don't mind calling it to order, then we can.
Okay, I
I'll
really do
move.
not want to be the chair.
I know,
but
I know, that's what my motion will be.
Okay.
You know what?
That's what
I
my
will
motion
call
will
the
be.
meeting to order.
Second it.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, we're in order. I think the first thing we talked about was electing a new chairman or chairwoman for the committee. And so, first, thank you to Janet for all the
Yeah.
work she's done to keep this thing
Thank you.
going.
Thank you very
It's
much.
been an amazing thing that you've done, and the work that you did was much appreciated.
Thank you.
It's never appreciated enough, that's the problem. So nominations are open for a new.
Well, I'm gonna nominate you,
Um,
just because I think that's the proper choice.
I respectfully
Are you
think that
declining?
that's probably not the thing to do, because I am on the select board, and I would be taking 2 bites out of the
I
donut.
say, okay, no,
And it really isn't fair to do that. So,
well, I'm on the planning board, so I'm out. I mean,
Michael's not here, Frank's not coming. Did we hear from anyone else?
should we table this?
We
Yeah.
could, but we just won't have an official chair.
Unless someone would like to volunteer.
Yeah, or think about it maybe,
Yeah.
because
Yeah,
it would be
think
nice,
about
I mean,
it.
I just don't have time to initiate is
I
the
get it.
issue, so,
Right,
which is
yeah.
why nothing's happened for a few months.
Okay,
I'll think about it,
thank you.
but
Okay,
I'm
good.
so new that
New is good.
new is good.
new is fresh ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi.
All right, so I guess I move that we table the discussion until our next meeting. Is there a second?
Second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Table.
Okay.
Okay. So,
Am I late?
no, not really.
Not that we
I was
had
in
a
the firehouse.
quorum
I thought we
either,
were
if that
meeting in the
matters.
firehouse.
I'm sorry?
Not that we had a quorum, if that.
No, and we probably didn't even do that, you're right. Good point.
We could take it up at the end if more people come and otherwise.
So Julie was gonna print out something for us.
Did everybody read the letter
Yeah.
Yeah.
and the response? I mean, and the report with, I don't know if you read their initial report from whenever it was, back in May.
I read it, I can't say I processed it.
What?
I read it, I can't say I processed it.
Yeah, well, I know, I just reread it, I hadn't read it in a few months, but they really were saying they basically want to work towards shutdown,
Right.
you know, with monitoring 2 of the wells, but shutting all the extraction wells, so, which, you know, I mean, I'm not opposed to that, although they didn't mention the 2 new wells at all, which surprises me.
Should I get Joe on the line?
Yeah, we should
Okay.
definitely get Joe on the line.
He said to call him at a particular number.
So I'm curious if he says anything about that. I mean, I still have some concerns, but I also really want to see the solar go
I
through.
wanna make sure everybody can hear.
Hello,
Yeah.
Joe speaking.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, Joe.
We're all here.
Uh-huh.
Well,
How are you doing?
Well, good. Yeah, I wish I was there, but, New Jersey's not too bad. It's a beautiful day. Yeah, whatever. All right.
Can everybody, I just wanna make sure
Yeah,
everybody can
yeah.
hear you
Oh,
all
for
right.
sure.
Apparently
Yeah.
everybody can, so. Well, thank you. We may have to interrupt our discussion in the next 20 minutes or so to move to a different room,
Okay.
but we'll hold on to you while we're doing that. And if I
Okay.
lose you, I'll just call you back.
Okay, very good. All right.
Okay.
So Janet's still in the mix, but she's she's stepping down as the organizer. is that
Janet
right?
is trying to step
I'm
down.
trying to step down.
Nice. I don't think that's gonna happen.
Is it because you got too
All
much
right.
work to do with the?
There's still stuff printing. There's a lot to
And
print.
work.
Take one, pass it down.
Between work and
Yeah, I see.
just through my mouth. There's
This is
3.
the Dear Julie letter portion of it.
We just, Julie just printed your letter, Joe, which none of us have
Okay.
seen.
Well, it's not, yes, it's my letter, yeah. It's with his answers on it.
That's okay. So you got that email. Okay, good.
Then I got the Sanborn Head with comments, I think.
Yeah. So I did. I went through it quickly once. I mean, it's not like I've done a deep dive on it, but I do have. I think I make. just a couple of key points I guess is worth making.
Yeah, they're good. Well, Joe, I have one question.
Yeah.
I may have missed it, but it doesn't look like they talked about the two new wells.
Well, they did. So the only mention they have of those wells is in the optimization plan, and all they say is that well, they just mentioned the concentration at the 5D location. So yeah, they did. They're basically showing a cross section from the site, from the the source area towards. They think the path. They think the major transport path is from the old facility, and it runs essentially down towards that well 5D. And they're saying that the 5D is essentially an indicator of contamination at that point, so that one thing I can say is that when they put in those new wells, it takes a while for the concentrations to equilibrate. I don't know how they install them, but sometimes when they drill them, they essentially inject water. I think it's called a drive and wash method, and so they essentially pressure water down into the hole to get the rock cuttings out. So what that does is it dilutes the aquifer. So it takes a while for concentrations to come back. And the point there is that if you look at the concentrations they have another well 3R they put in, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and that concentration is still going up. So I think it does take a while for these things to get to an equilibrium. So in that sense, the jury's still out, though I have to say, according to the DEP, so what? DEP thinks that the plume is going to the estuary. There's no significant risk for human health and the environment, and they're agreeable. Essentially, they're essentially looks like they're agreeing that lead vances can essentially shut down the system in a very short time frame. So the main question I would have is what are the metrics? So one thing to shut down the system, but another one to monitor the response to that. And the monitoring would answer the question. It would support their opinion about the fact that what they're saying is that the source, yes, there's mass in the source, but it's really not leaching out very quickly, and therefore it does no good to operate these shallow wells anymore. And I can't disagree with that. I think they're pumping, of the 4 wells, pumping maybe one or 2 gallons a minute at best. So really it's doing nobody any good to pump those wells. What they want to do is shut those wells down and then pump the deeper well for a period of time, 1 to 5 years, and then monitor the response there. What they look for is how does concentration change with time. But at the same time, they say essentially, yes, we're going to look at the trend, but we really don't, the metric about the trend, it doesn't seem to matter, because they say in essence their plan is to shut down the system in 5 years anyway, regardless of the trend. So it is kind of a funny thing. The bottom line being that the state doesn't think that the impact has the potential to ever cause a problem, given the date of the contamination. So Now, the thing I can say is that I agree with that. I actually do agree with that. I don't think I'm surprised that the state is allowing the source to continue to flux into the aquifer. That seems odd to me. It's one thing to say that the plume's there. You can't do anything about it, really. I mean, what's out of the barn is out of the barn. Nature's gonna take care of it. But the problem I have with it is that the state seems to think that it doesn't matter that the source continues to flux into the aquifer, and I guess I don't think they have the source well characterized, to tell you the truth. I've tried to make an argument, as you may remember, that around on, I think it's on the extraction well 4 side, there is a different fingerprint, a different chemical fingerprint, which is clearly a different source, and it's that area that's impacting the deep aquifer. But I tried to make an argument, and the state just discounted it. So what can I do? I can only argue so much.
Joe, I've got a question, I'm sorry. It just seems to me, can they predict what's gonna happen? Isn't there underground changes hydrologically, geologically, that can change everything around, and if you're not monitoring, you could have a big increase in that? I mean, how do they, it's like they're looking into a crystal ball and saying, okay, and even if it does go higher, so what? So, I mean, I'm not following that logic.
Well, I can't disagree with that, with the fact that they don't seem to care whether it goes up or down. But to your point, when they shut down the system, they didn't describe the plan of monitoring, the frequency and the duration of monitoring, but they will have to monitor they have to continue monitoring for a period of time after they shut down the system. And Max does make a point of that they will be monitoring, and if things change, we have the right to make them start the system up again. So there is that possibility. The problem is they don't really describe the monitoring plan nor the metrics. They say, well, we'll do this if this happens. Well, what is the how do you determine what the if is? Are they looking at trends? They say 1 to 5 years. Well, by the way, 5 years in transport time is nothing. I mean, certainly 1 year is not enough to make any decisions. Typically 5 years is like the minimum time one would need to look at this to see what the trends are. So that detail about the monitoring and how they're going to judge, how they're going to make their decisions is not clear in this paper. But the bottom line, as you said, when you read it, it looks like so what? So if the levels go up, they go up. If they so that's kind of an odd thing. But the fact is, the state will continue to review, and I don't. Unfortunately, there's no metric that says, okay, if concentrations, if we shut down the system and concentrations increase, we will do this. Well, it doesn't say they'll restart it. It doesn't say they'll do characterization. It simply says, at one point they simply said, if it goes up, we'll shut it down anyway. That's kind of an odd thing.
Joe, I have a question. I'm looking at the map they sent with that May report, and it shows the interpreted lateral extent of impacted groundwater, which doesn't go as far as one of the wells on the Hoffs's property where the Gray House is, the new wells. So I'm curious, my question is, if it migrates past that Hoffs's house property and onto the neighbors, the Watkins or whoever it is, I mean, is that a possibility over time, and how would we ever know? I mean, it may not get to their well, because right now the house is by Route 220, but it would prevent them from ever drilling another well potentially down slope.
Yeah,
Is
well,
that a concern?
well, I did make a point, I did make a note of that. The question I'd have for you, I didn't read the environmental covenant, but is the Hofs's house involved in the environmental covenant?
Yes.
And is there a moratorium on groundwater use on Hofs's
Well,
property?
they had a provisional area based on those new wells, so they didn't actually delineate that in the. I
Well,
haven't
they're
seen-
also serviced by town water.
Yeah, but there was, on the covenant, there was a provisional area where you could never extract groundwater, but they hadn't made it a definite area, as far as I know. Maybe there's a new amendment to the covenant, but I don't think we've seen that. Because they hadn't put in the 2 new wells yet. So I'm just curious, because those 2 new wells showed elevated VOCs.
Well, yeah, they're pretty high, and so that's if the environmental covenant doesn't put a moratorium on Hofs's as well ever starting up again, then it should, because that's the bottom line is this, that it's the state's opinion that given the current conditions, right, current use of the aquifer and natural flow to the estuary, there are no significant risks to human health and the environment. Okay, so that, and I honestly can't disagree with that. So on top of that, they put an environmental covenant that says, okay, we need to preserve that. We need to preserve that current condition by saying no groundwater use, because if
That's where they tied into
if you were to put up a new well, that's going to change the flow pattern. So the question is there a property near enough to this particular site that could perhaps have an influence on groundwater flow conditions?
Well, that's I mean, I feel like maybe it's not under our purview to deal with it, but the property south of their ownership,
Okay.
that's what I was wondering, if, it basically is going to affect their property values if they ever wanted to, say, put a lot by the shore, they could never drill a well there. But I assume that's something we don't deal with? I don't know. But I was surprised they didn't address it, because the 2
Yeah.
new wells show contamination, so the plume isn't, we don't know where the outer extent of the plume is, although they map it as not going even as far as the well. So I was a little confused by that.
Well, I do see. There's two things with respect to that. I do remember someone asked Max about sentinel wells, and
Yeah.
Max said, "Well, we don't have any sentinel wells here." Well, as it turns out, we don't, because a
Right.
sentinel well is actually a clean well that shows the formal boundary of the plume.
Right.
Now, what they say, though, is that they understand the flow patterns well enough that even though well 5D has considerable amount of mass in it, it is moving directly towards the estuary and not going south. It's going, I guess, if that's south, it's going due west. So that's their opinion. And there is, I don't know what map you're looking at. The one I'm looking at has water levels, has a water level map, and I see that, the way they drew the contours, clearly the water is flowing to the estuary, which makes sense to me. But the deeper the impact, the less influence the estuary is going to have. So that's going to be an interesting thing when they go to when they do the analysis at the MW3, the pumping well. They're going to do this downhole work for these flute liners, which is very interesting and good. Very good technology. But what they're going to find is where's the mass entering that well, and I think they're going to find most of the mass is entering from the top of the well. So if that's the case, that's good, because what they'll do is they'll close up the rest of the well and then just focus on where the mass is entering.
Can I ask a couple of questions? Item number 2 in the letter sent back to Julie, he answered a question that Julie didn't ask. We asked whether a cap could be put on the site to reduce migration of the solvents and whatever, and the molybdenum, whatever else is on the site. We asked them whether that could be made part of the covenant. And he segues into, well, that concrete slab is not a cap. Well, we didn't ask whether it was a cap, we asked whether the department would cap the site. And he just didn't answer the question.
Would ask them.
And I think it still would be a good idea to cap the site to reduce the amount of groundwater going into the well and washing the solvents.
Well, they also, in the solar proposal, it has to be ballasted, so they can't penetrate the cap, because they're saying the cap is, they don't want to penetrate it. So there's an irony there, because it's, the frost is breaking it apart.
So that's,
Well, yes,
that's
you're
what
right.
leaped off the page with me. He and gave an answer that didn't answer the question.
You're right. You're right. And here's my spin on that, and that is, so a cap in a regulatory context is a very formal thing. You've got to have, there's actually regulatory rules about what constitutes a cap. Now, what they have out here is simply a hardscape. Let's just call it a hardscape that is currently functioning to limit infiltration. But the environmental covenant says you cannot disturb that hardscape. So the implication is that it is a cap. It is a cap that is needed to limit infiltration, which I wholeheartedly agree with. But by not calling it a cap, there's nothing that says you have to maintain it. So over time, this thing will deteriorate and just crumble up, and over time, more and more water will flux through it. But the only thing I can think of is that the opinion is that while there may be source now, and the cap is protecting against it, that by the time this hardscape deteriorates, then it won't be needed. So there's no reason to maintain it. Now, I think that's crazy.
I think we should re-ask the question and specifically
Yeah.
ask whether
Well-
a formal cap is advisable.
Well,
then-
or just bring up to Max, tell him, look, we don't understand there seems to be a discrepancy to us. In the environmental covenant, it says, do not disturb this thing, which to us means it actually has a function of limiting infiltration. But the state is not calling it a cap. But if there is a function of infiltration, then shouldn't there be at least a maintenance component to make sure that it's functioning as such? In essence, ask him to explain what is the role of if it's not a cap, why even mention it in the environmental covenant?
Joe, I have been jogging down there for 4 years now, and I run through that. That is no cap. That is
No, I know.
crumbling.
We know.
That is horrible.
There's
So,
infiltration
yes, for
through
them to call that anything other than rubble is to me, is an embarrassment.
And that's why we raised that.
Yeah, I mean, that's doing nothing. I mean, there's
Yeah.
trees growing out of it. It looks like it's an abandoned, like derelict property. So
Yeah,
it's
you're
doing
right.
nothing in
Well,
the way of,
Right. Yeah.
so I don't know how they can get away with that.
Well, we
really.
can ask that again
Yeah.
and to clarify that. I think we should do that, what you're suggesting, for sure.
The second thing that and you've hit on it, Joe, a couple of times. They've said that the site, the contamination on site is not migrating. Let me see if we have not found any migration under the property of others based on the data in several series of investigations. Well, that's in paragraph 3.
No.
We have not found any migration onto the property of others. Well, I sort of take issue with that because not this Sanborn Head report, but I think it was the prior one, and it was on page 6. It said that the plume was moving westward, and we don't know how far it's gotten because there are no sentinel wells. So the plume is moving westward. You just said southwestward. Maybe we're off a few points of the compass here, but it's moving towards the estuary. So
Right.
it does have the potential of moving on off-site.
Hopefully
Now,
they should.
there's no drinking water issue if it gets into the river, but are there
Right.
any environmental issues to the fish, the lobsters, the clams that live in that estuary?
Well, doesn't it supposedly volatilize once it reaches it?
Well,
I thought
That's
that-
their argument.
That's what they tell us, and is that not?
Have we seen that in a letter?
I think we've been told that anyway by their engineers and.
It
I
will be,
think
it will be
Joe
highly
has said that
diluted,
as
but
well, yeah,
if you're living in it, it's a little different than having an occasional glass of water.
right.
What about the metals?
Well, the metals is something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the metals is something. So when it comes to VOC, so yes, it is. They can't say the plume is relegated to the property, right? It is. They say they admit that it's discharging to the estuary. Now, typically VOCs, these types of solvents, really do not, unless they're very high concentrations, they do not have a significant impact on the benthic community. By the time it hits the estuary, it's so dispersed and the levels are so low, and as it comes up through the sediments, the bacteria, it is actually a food source for bacteria. So I've been through many of these risk assessments, and the VOCs typically don't do. The levels are pretty high when it comes to benthic organisms. I really don't think that is an issue. It's the inorganics, the metals that, and if there's any PCBs, I did read that they used oils to suppress dust back in the day, and that's a famous source of PCB contamination. So I haven't seen. I think I asked. They said they sent you guys a map of all the soil data that they collected. And
Did you?
I'd like to see that if I could.
Okay, those are my two things, except for one minor thing. A tree has
Yeah.
fallen into the officer's house.
They know.
They
Yeah.
know, okay.
But, yeah, it's not hard to get an order.
They're talking to a local guy to take
Well, I
care
know
of it.
the one, you got the email saying he couldn't do it.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah, Ron just sent an email.
Oh.
But I CC'd you, I think, that there are many arborists. We had a tree put a hole in our roof last November.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't take a month to get somebody out
No,
there.
it shouldn't.
That's part of the thing that's so aggravating. It takes so long to hear for anything to happen.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I think we should put those questions in, that we still have, but I personally would like to see it repurposed. So the question is, how do we get that to happen while we
Well, I
continue?
think they're working on that.
Right, they
My
are, but-
understanding is that Revision has put in an application.
Right. But will our work jeopardize that in any way? I'm just curious.
I-
Are we seen as a totally
We're gonna
separate
talk to
thing?
this guy, at least from the company, at some point, he's gonna come up here and discuss things. But my impression is that they are now thinking, Leadvance is now thinking of becoming a participant in the project.
Right.
So I think the solar
that.
farm will happen.
Okay. There's nothing that would hold that up. Yeah.
Right, I mean, that's not really
Yeah, they're
it's a
private.
private entity.
And I'm fine with that, but I just would like to see the visual blight piece, the house, and these questions answered, so we know that it's not gonna ruin the value of the abutting
think-
property.
An executive would be in order.
I agree. And I move that we go into executive session under 4056C, discussing economic development and contracts.
Okay,
Is there a second?
do you want that?
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
I like our roving chairmanship.